So it's early Saturday morning. This is why we are sat in a car park, because people are still sleeping in the Airbnb, and we didn't want to disturb them. But we've always felt that transparency is very important. Transparency in decisions, transparency in the thought process of getting to those decisions. And with everything that's been going on, I imagine that this video will go a bit back and forth. My thoughts still aren't very clear on the subject and what's been happening. So yesterday there was a full day of competition, and I don't think anyone really knew how to feel or how to expect, or what to expect. And I think that was evident on the competition floor. It's just complicated for the athletes. They celebrate a win, do they push hard, do they not push hard? There's just this myriad of questions that start occurring. So after the video yesterday, we went into we went to the venue, and it was a really emotional experience. Everyone had a bit more time to process, hugging, especially the people who'd been close to Lazar. Like I broke down a few times. It's just a lot of things going on. We started to go through the events, and it felt weird. I think one thing that became quite evident is that people were either more or less impacted by the trauma, and people also have a very different way in processing the trauma. And especially when you've seen how the athletes are behind the scenes and how they are on the competition floor, I just think that's very evident. But one thing I'd also like to do is to take things back to Thursday. And one of the reasons for that is I think what happened that day, it is really important as to why some of the decisions we're taking and moving forward are happening. Thursday was such a hard day. We were at event one, and it was like a classic start to the CrossFit Games. Everyone's excited, everyone's ready to get going. Off-site event is one of my favorite things, is these off-site events, especially to start the games. And we were all prepared, so that we had a bit of a plan. I was going to pick up the car just so there wasn't a delay in the parking. Athletes would come in, and we just get off straight away. So there's no, so we can optimize rest. It's often what we do at competitions. We get back home, everyone starts checking the leaderboard, and what had happened was, like, people started to notice, okay, Lazar's time's not in. Also, Henrik's time wasn't in. And this happens quite a lot in competitions because like chip times don't work, whatever it may be. So we didn't really think too much of it. We then hear the team events cancelled and Lazar was still missing. And unfortunately, at that point, you're still in disbelief. You're like, everything's fine. I'm sure there was just some slight injury. Maybe something happened on the run. These will be fine. And obviously, we haven't got any information yet. We're just all making assumptions. As time moves on and CrossFit take down their video, team events being cancelled, everyone's just very unsure at this point. And I think we're all still in the mindset that Lazar's going to be okay. At that point, we didn't know what to do, if we go into the venue or not. And again, one of the reasons why I want to tell the story from this way is because I think it's important, again, in as we go forward. So we get together, arrive to the venue, and again, it's a very strange feeling. I think that one thing we're noticing as we come to the States is that we all have the same language. Everyone here is speaking English. There are notable cultural differences. You have people from parts of Asia who have very different cultures. You have people from Europe who, we express emotions and have different cultures. People in the US, people from Australia. And so in these times of it's starting to get clearer and clearer that something has happened to Lazar and probably something very serious. And so there's lots of gatherings, lots of emotions start to occur. And at this point, this is probably around, I believe around 12 o'clock, we don't have any clear information if Lazar's passed away or not. But we're told that the events are cancelled for the day. We're going to go, and so we go home. It then becomes apparent that Lazar has passed, drowning in the lake. And a few hours later, I think around 4 o'clock, all athletes and coaches are then taken back to the venue. And to put that into context, everyone was up early. They went through the swim portion of the event, and they just found out that one of their competitors, one of their friends, one of their colleagues had died. And not only that, the circumstances of the death have been pulled into question. Is it preventable, or was it preventable? And from stories that have occurred, from videos that are there, it becomes it's definitely a question that's raised in people's minds. And it's obviously hugely traumatic. It's hugely traumatic when one of your friends or someone passes away. And I think the circumstances of this, that he passed away, Zar passed away in the way that he did, doing a competition like this, it is of significance. I mentioned this yesterday. People say, okay, these things happen in sport all the time, but they haven't happened in our sport. And when it comes into of was this preventable or not, and that's not my decision to make. That is for the police or the investigative body that are looking into it. But the fact that the questions there adds to the level of emotion. And I also think that these guys, these athletes, had all just done that same event. And in a part of doing that event, they had to swim over or swim past. And I find it really hard to even imagine something like that. Even being there, I feel responsible. And those are my feelings. Then, a few hours later, there's a message saying, kind of like an email going, okay, an open discussion as to what to do with the rest of the competition. And this is where I think that, obviously decisions start having to be made. And I feel quite strongly that in that moment of trauma, placing the decision on what happens for the rest of the competition on the athletes is extremely unfair. And I believe at that time, the focus should not have been on, okay, athletes, what happens with the rest of the decision? What happens with the rest of the competition? Are we continuing for the games? Are you getting the prize money, not getting the prize money? There were athletes in that field who were just teenagers. And I really believe the decision should have been to give the athletes time and honestly, to be able to seek professional grievance counselling for them to be able to speak to a professional, to be able to process that, not to be basically given a decision if the competition goes on or not. And then also, kind of as was expected from the original decision, for the competition just to continue and those guys to have to step out onto the floor. And I think there's lots of ways of looking at the, how the decisions are made from the different perspectives. And ultimately, the team, we spend the time with the athletes. Our devotion is to the athletes. And for us, the other factors of, if it has to go on to ESPN, the impacts for the vendors or whatever that may be, our primary concern is the athletes. And I think that placing that burden on them and that questioning on them then and there was a very tough decision for them. And I think that time should have been given. And I think there's lots of details I think that should have gone into that decision. This didn't happen on Sunday morning, and then the final event being on Sunday night. It happened in the first event. It was a 4-day competition, and there was ample opportunity to give more time for people to be able to make informed and non-rushed decisions. So they don't have to take decisions that they can regret later. They could think on it. They literally had hours to make the decision. And I would honestly say I don't think that anyone was, or it's tough to think rationally after such a traumatic decision. From our standpoint as coaches and people that the athletes that we work with, we wanted to support their decisions, but it has to be said, the coaches aren't professional grievance counsellors. These can run really deep issues, and then having athletes out on the floor having to face and process the trauma, such recent trauma out on the floor, I think I just don't think it's very responsible, and I think that there could have been more time and consideration given to the athletes, considering that this happened on the first day and there was still 4 more days for things to occur. And I know now that there's lots of people with lots of opinions, people who go either end of the spectrum from just get on with it, it's a competition, to people who think they should cancel the whole thing. And I think there's arguments for each side of this. I think that what I would have liked to have seen is maybe more consideration for the athletes, and actually the ability for, to seek professional help, to seek professional guidance, to be able to have a proper period of grieving so they can make a more informed and deliberate decision about what they do moving forward. And Jacqueline and Moritz, I don't want to speak for the athletes. I think it's important that they share what they want to share, and they do that in their own words. And so, they will be making decisions on how they move forward. There's also another point that I would like to bring up, and this comes into the legitimacy of the test. We often talk about that we're testing to find the fittest on earth. And, CrossFit has a broad definition of fitness. But what does it take in order to find the fittest on earth? And, we put our faith in the programmers who organise that and program the CrossFit Games. I think one of the principles that has been held from CrossFit, lots of people talk about certain principles of this unknown and known element, but the repeatability and the more scientific component of what's going on is something I think's got lost. And examples like this happen. If your original test, the person who we determine programs for the fittest on earth has an original test. And actually you just dismiss 2 events from that, and then you change workouts around. Are you still testing for the fittest on earth? Or actually, are you just saying that basically you can program anything you want and you test for the fittest on earth? You know, do you take that to random extremes of things that you do? And so I think, you know, right now the legitimacy of the test has been pulled into question, not only because certain athletes have had to make very hard decisions and withdraw from the competition, so you don't have the fittest field on the floor, but also because you've changed workouts and reduced workouts, so you don't have the full test that was originally programmed. So I don't necessarily see how you can claim that you are fighting for that title. And I think it's a very controversial statement because there's no objectivity to the statement. There's, you know, the games could be programmed with, you know, name the random events, and you could still claim it's the testing for the fittest on earth because there is no objective measurement. And you know, unfortunately, there's been lots of talk, lots of questions as we've gone through this period. You know, we're still only halfway through the competition. It's been extremely traumatic. I think that more optimal decisions for the athletes could have been made that are in their best interests. And I find it really sad to witness that athletes are being forced to compete under these circumstances. I'm sure more information will come through later in the day, but as I said, I just wanted to keep the transparency, and obviously with something that's so affecting our sport so much, I think it was something important to talk about.